Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to our study this morning. We're going to be in Ezekiel. We're going to be finishing up chapter 36. We're going to do verses 16 to 38 today. Last week, we established that the land of the house of Israel, the whole house of Israel, belongs to God, and he gave it to Israel. Edom and the malicious neighbors, other malicious neighbors, were jealous for the land, and they did everything they could to cause Israel and Judah to fall as they could, so they could grab the land for themselves. Today, we see the future restoration of the fruitfulness in Israel. There's three parts to the lesson today. Verses 16 to 23 are reasons for the coming restoration. We're going to see that the restoration has not occurred yet. It was promised, back, this is like 600 or 700 BC that we're talking about, and it hasn't occurred yet, and it will not occur until the second coming of Jesus. So the first part is the verse 16 to 23, reasons for the coming restoration. Then the second part is verses 24 to 32, which is 7 elements of the coming restoration. What's it going to look like? And verses 33 to 38 is a summary of the benefits of restoration. So let's get right on into it. Let's start with verse 16. I want to read I think I'll do, well, let me just read the whole thing, verses 16 to 21. We'll get a good look at it before we get into it. Again, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, when the people of Israel were living in their own land, they defiled it by their conduct and their actions. Their conduct was like a woman's monthly uncleanness in my sight. So I poured out my wrath on them because they had shed blood in the land and because they had defiled it with their idols. I dispersed them among the nations, and they were scattered through the countries. I judged them according to their conduct and their actions. And wherever they went among the nations, they profaned my holy name, for it was said of them, These are the Lord's people, yet they had to leave his land. I had concern for my holy name, which the people of Israel profaned among the nations where they had gone. Let me read verse 16 and 17 again, and we'll be started. Again, the word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, when the people of Israel were living in their own land, they defiled it by their conduct and their actions. Their conduct was like a woman's monthly uncleanness in my sight. Okay, again, we have the reminder that these are the words that come directly from the Lord. They're not Ezekiel's words. He's the one that records them, but he is only recording what God tells him to say. They're the words from the Lord. They were living in their own land. It's the land that God gave them. They defiled the land with their conduct and their actions. We're going to see a little bit about what that means, but it's relative to their conduct, and the way they defile the land is relative to what God had expected of them. He gives them guidelines. Here's how you're supposed to live, and they didn't live that way, and it comes under the heading of defiling the land. He gives an example of defilement from the law regarding blood and the woman's monthly cycle. This is probably a bit confusing because it's a natural process that women go through, and yet it's considered a point of uncleanness according to the way the law is written. So and he says that is the part of their conduct that causes the problem, the defilement of the land. So I want to try to explain how this comes about, just so we can move on and get past this. But just to understand what he's talking about regarding a woman's monthly cycle, he says they defile the land by their conduct. He uses the example of the monthly cycle of a woman, and that is actually covered in Leviticus 15, verses 19 to 24, which we won't read, but it's the impurity of the situation as it relates to ceremonial uncleanness, not sin. It's not a sinful situation. It's the way it affects ceremonial uncleanness, the way they can worship. During this time, she would be unable to take part in religious activities. It has nothing to do with sin. It is purely related to Jewish law. Now, any Jew that heard this would know exactly what he's talking about, but we're not Jewish. We don't live by the law. We've never lived by the law. So it's probably a point of confusion for us. As Ezekiel is saying here, all he is saying here is that the Israelites had disregarded the law, which this being only an example, and in so doing had polluted the land. Through the shedding of blood, now here's the crux of the matter, through the shedding of blood by any means, this being one example, brings one close to the realm of the dead. You know, if you're losing blood, if you get shot by an arrow or speared or shot with a gun or something, you start to bleed, you might die from it. So the shedding of blood, regardless of the means, is something that's associated with the realm of the dead. Now you've heard the story of the Good Samaritan, where the Jewish people would pass by this man that had been beaten and robbed, and they wouldn't touch him because they were afraid he was dead. And they were on the way to Jerusalem to worship, and this would put them in an unclean situation, I believe. And so they wouldn't stop to help. So it was something associated with death. This is the same thing. It's the shedding of blood. And so it's considered something along the same lines as something that is what the commentary calls something near the realm of death. This would keep one from being in contact with the realm of life, which is the living God. So you wouldn't be able to worship or participate in any kind of religious activities. So this is the lead in to verse 18. So let's go there and see what we find. Let me read verse 18. So I poured out my wrath on them because they had shed blood in the land and because they had defiled it with their idols. Now, he is putting this monthly cycle that the women go through, the shedding of blood, into the category of shedding blood, which is the same kind from the standpoint of cleanness or uncleanness relative to the law, is the same category as the violence that the people were living by, where they were killing their neighbors, they were killing their families, they were exacting violence on everybody around them. So the shedding of blood was nothing uncommon, and he's saying that is what has defiled the land. He goes on to say the defilements reached further into their practices of bloodshed and violence in the way they treated people, even family members. So the shedding of blood that the women go through is put in the same category as the shedding of blood, which was considered a defilement of the land because it's near are related to being close to the realm of the dead, and that was the problem. Okay, so let's look at verse 19. I hope I did a decent job of explaining that. I'm not sure that it really matters so much as to understand that the real problem was the violence that the people were exacting on the people around them, to their fellow Jews. They were killing them. They had really bad business practices, dishonest business practices, and it was causing and bringing about the shedding of blood. And that was where the real defilement came from. Okay, verse 19. I dispersed them among the nations, and they were scattered through the countries. I judged them according to their conduct and their actions. This is a restatement of further reasons for judgment and the judgment itself. They were dispersed into foreign lands. God judged them according to their own conduct and actions, and it turns out those actions are violence and idolatry, primarily idolatry. But the violence was the contrary to law as well. This should have been no surprise to them, for God had laid out his specific expectations, which he spelled out in the law. They were doing things completely contrary to the law. So they should not be surprised. God is not a God of infinite patience. He doesn't put up with stuff forever. So they shouldn't be surprised that he decided to react to their actions and their conduct. So let me read verse 20. There we go. And wherever they went among the nations, they profaned. Now listen to this. This is important. And wherever they went among the nations, they profaned my holy name, for it was said of them, these are the Lord's people, and yet they had to leave his land. This was given as a reason for mocking, but the essence they are saying is that God cannot take care of his own people. So we have mocking and scorn going on here. The people are having to leave their land, and the reason they got to leave the land because they've got a weak God. They're mocking God, and they're treating the people with scorn and making fun of them. And in so doing, they are profaning God's name, because the people of the nations are getting an inaccurate picture of God. They're thinking he's weak, when the whole point of the thing is that he's strong and he's able to bring about judgment when he deems judgment is necessary. So what they've done is questioned God's character. That's not a good thing. But you have to remember, we're talking about pagan people that do not know God, the people of the nations. They do not know Yahweh. So he's just another God to them, and he's weak. So by their measure, because of what he has allowed to happen to his people, without realizing he was the one that brought it about them for very valid reasons. Okay, so what is important here is that they profane God's name. To know a name is to know the character that goes with that name. For example, somebody that knows Kenny, me, if rumors started going around about me about something, people that know me would say, that doesn't sound like Kenny. And that's what's going on with God. If they knew God, they would say that doesn't sound like God when they're talking about him being weak and allowing his people to be put into captivity. So in so questioning his character, they're profaning his name. I hope that's clear to you, because it's important. Character. So because the Israelites are seen as wandering through the nations, is to say by the nations that God cannot take care of his own people. So I hope you see that and understand it, because it's very important as we go on. So let's look at verse 21. I had concern for my holy name, God says. He just said the people profaned it. So God says, I had concern for my holy name, which the people of Israel profaned among the nations where they had gone. So God is concerned about his image. They think I'm weak, is what he's saying. And he's mocked, and he doesn't like it. Pretty clear. So let's look at verse 22. Therefore say to the Israelites, this is what the sovereign Lord says. It is not for your sake, people of Israel, that I'm going to do these things, but for the sake of my holy name, which you have profaned among the nations where you have gone. So he starts with the word therefore. So he's just gotten through saying, you profaned my name. I've got concern for my name. Therefore, then he's getting ready to say something that goes, as a result of those things, this is what I say. And he says, therefore, not for you, but for the sake of my name, I'm doing these things. So they're saying his name is profane because he's portrayed by the nations as being weak. He said, I can't allow that. So what I'm going to do for the sake of my name, not because the people deserved restoration. So the restoration is what we're getting ready to see coming about. He's saying it's not because the people deserve restoration, but because of his image, for the sake of his name. Actually, he says his holy name. Restoration, whether it's on this point of them not deserving, restoration is an act of grace by God. They will not receive something that they deserve. Restoration they do not deserve. It's an act of grace that God is going to give it, but he's doing it for the sake of his name. All right, verse 23. I will show the holiness of my great name, which has been profaned among the nations, the name you have profaned among them. Then the nations will know that I am the Lord, declares the sovereign Lord, when I am proved holy through you before their eyes. When you go through restoration, they're going to know that I'm a holy God. So this profaning his name is a point of holiness with him. He feels that he's not being portrayed as holy. He's going to fix that. He's going to fix it by giving the people restoration. So we get another step up here. He's concerned about his holy name, but he goes on to refer to it as the holiness of his great name. So we're now set up for restoration. The restoration of Israel will stand as a signal to the nations that Yahweh is still in control and he still regards Israel as his people. Wow. In spite of all they have done, he still loves them. He still regards them as his people. And this restoration is going to be the signal to the nation that Yahweh is in control. He is a strong God. He is holy. His name is holy. Okay, so let's look at verses 24 to 32. These are 7 elements of the coming restoration. Let's look at verse 24. For I will take you out of the nations. What's happened? Let's go back and review. Assyria conquered the northern kingdom, took them into captivity, exiled them, deported them from their land, and they were assimilated into the nations. They just basically disappeared. From our perspective, God knows where they are, but they're not missing. Then 150 years later, Babylon comes along, conquers the southern kingdom, puts them into exile for 70 years, and as a result of them being conquered.
Sorry, I don't have an answer for that.
Sorry about that. As a result of them being in exile, while they were in exile under Babylon, the Medes and the Persians conquered Babylon. So the southern kingdom is still among the nations, but they're not under Babylon anymore. They're under the Medes and the Persians. And then the Greeks come along and conquer the Medes and the Persians. Then the Romans come along and conquer the Greeks. So this whole time, the southern kingdom has been under the control of somebody. And in 70 AD, it's even going to get worse because Rome is going to destroy Jerusalem, and all the Jews, Christian and non-Christian alike, are going to be dispersed. So they're going to be all over everywhere. So it's 24 says, "For I will take you out of the nations, I will gather you from all the countries and bring you back into your own land." So there's going to be a gathering from the nations, out of the nations, from all of the countries. They are going to be everywhere. All of the countries, it says. And I just kind of went through how they were scattered and when they were scattered. And as of the time of Ezekiel, the big scattering has not even occurred yet. When Rome destroys Jerusalem, it's going to be even worse. So the Jews are going to be all over the world. Okay, so let's look at verse 25. Well, let me read 24 again. He says, "For I will take you out of the nations. They were scattered." He said, "I'm going to bring you back. I will gather you from all the countries and bring you back to your own land," which is the land of Israel, the land God gave to Israel. This is the promised land. So verse 25 says this, "I will sprinkle clean water on you, and you will be clean. I will cleanse you from all your impurities and from all your idols." A cleansing from impurities, and especially idolatry, from that of verse 18, where he talked about was their part of their conduct, was their idolatrous behavior. The cleansing will be done with water. Keep in mind that cleansing, like our baptism, is one outward expression which requires an internal action like repentance to have any effect. All right, so it's an attitude, and they're going to have to receive that attitude of cleansing. They're going to have a proper attitude for it to take hold, which they will. They will receive it. Okay, let's look at verse 26 and 27. This is so wonderful. Let's do a verse at a time. Verse 26. You've heard it many times. Verse 26. "Then you will live in the land I gave you." "I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. I will remove from you your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh." Pure sweetness, pure love, pure grace. He says you're going to receive a new heart. That's not a rebuilt heart. It's not a refurbished heart. It's not a repaired heart. It is a new heart. And it's going to be free of hardness. He says it's not going to be a heart of stone. Hardness of heart, a hardened heart is what is the primary separator of the way we're supposed to relate from God to the way we actually relate to him. It's hardness of heart. We want to exalt ourselves rather than exalt God. We want to make decisions that we feel are best for us rather than what God feels are best for us. He's going to remove that hardened heart and give us a heart of flesh. It's going to be a heart that's more compassionate. It's going to be more full of love for God. And what's really cool is it's going to be one that's more compassionate and full of love towards man, to our neighbors, to the people around us, to the people we know and love. It's going to be a deeper love and more effective love. Okay, then verse 27. Verse 27 says, in 26, he said, I'm going to give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you. In verse 27, he says, I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. I'll put a new spirit. I'll put his spirit. He's going to put his spirit in us, which will draw you. It will draw us to him, or move us to be more aware and keep the laws and decrees that God has set before us. What we're going to see as we study, as we see further prophecies on this very point, we're going to see that law is going to be written on our hearts and ain't going to need a law because we're just going to know what it is. Okay, this is the same thing the Holy Spirit does for the Christian in the Gospel of John. The Gospel of John told us that the Spirit was to guide us and to remind us of the things we are to know and to be obedient to. We're just going to know. The Christian just knows because he has the Spirit. The New Testament actually indicates the Holy Spirit goes beyond the law in guiding the Christian. So that's how it's going to be. We're going to get new hearts and new spirits. Well, he's talking to the Jews here, but we know it's going to be all the people of God, people that are relating to him in a proper way. Okay, so let's look at verse 28. Verse 28 says this, then you will live in the land I gave your ancestors. You will be my people, and I will be your God. The root word for live is to dwell, which I love. It's to dwell. It just sounds like a place where you go and don't want to leave. I'm going to dwell there. These things, three things. They're going to live in the land I gave you. You're going to be my people. I'm going to be your God. That's reaffirmation of the covenant. And we're going to see later in our studies that it's going to be a new covenant. It's not going to be the covenant they were living under before. There's going to be a new covenant coming. All right, verse 29 and 30. Let's look at those. I will save you from your uncleanness. I will call for the grain and make it plentiful, and will not bring famine upon you. In verse 30, I will increase the fruit of the trees and the crops of the field so that you will no longer suffer disgrace among the nations because of famine. I'm going to purify you. You're going to have this new productivity in the land. There's not going to be no more famine. This new level of productivity of the land will serve to show that you are my people, to remove any possibility of scorn from among the nations. So if they were going through, let's just talk about that a minute. If they were going through situations where their land was not producing and they were going through some kind of famine, which they did occasionally, the nations would mock them. So you have a weak God. He can't even provide for you. And he said, that's going away under this new deal. You're going to get a new level of productivity in your land. We're going to see later that it's going to be Eden-like. It's going to be like in the days of Adam and Eve when it was first created. It's going to be Eden-like. There's not going to be any more mocking. There's not going to be any more scorn. And that sort of thing. So it brings us to verse 31. Then you will remember your evil ways and wicked deeds, and you will loathe yourself for your sins and detestable practices. This is so important. There will be a new relationship with God where you will remember your wicked ways, but more importantly, you will hate yourself for it. What does that mean? It means you will be repentant of it. You know, you can get in trouble with somebody, with your mother and daddy when you were kids, when you were a teenager. You knew what their expectations were for your life. You found yourself doing things that they didn't want you to do. Same when you're married, you may get in trouble with your wife for something, or she may get in trouble with you for something. And when it's all said and done, you look back on that and you say, why did I do that? Why did I do that? I knew my mother and daddy didn't want me to do that. It was not that big of an imposition for me to not do them and to be obedient to what they say. So you're always going to remember it, but you're going to know that you're forgiven. And that's what God is talking about here. You're going to hate yourself for it. Well, you may not hate yourself. He says you're going to hate yourself, so I guess we ought to believe it. But it's going to be a situation where you're always going to be aware of the way you lived your life. But under this new covenant, you're going to have a different kind of relationship with God going forward. All right, verse 32. I want you to know that I am not doing this for your sake, declares the sovereign Lord. Be ashamed and disgraced for your conduct, people of Israel. Okay, it's another reminder. I am not doing this for your sake. Not because, in other words, not because of what the nations are saying about you. You deserve what the nations are saying about you. I don't care what they're saying about you. You deserve it. And he said, be ashamed and disgraced for your conduct. This points, like the things that I just said about being disobedient to your mother and dad, or when you got in trouble with your wife or your husband, and that sort of thing, where you look back and you said, oh, I wish I hadn't done that, or why did I do that? He said, I want you to always remember it. I want you to always be ashamed of your conduct and disgraced by your conduct. Okay, this points back more or less to God giving this restoration for the sake of his name. We've talked about that already today. The nations will know he did not desert his people. He'll know that he is a strong God. They'll know that he is a holy God, and he'll know that they are still his people. All right, let's look at verse 33 to 38. This is something akin to creation. Listen as I read verses 33 to 36. Now, something you may not pick up on is that this stuff is going to happen all at once. And I don't mean like in the snap of a finger necessarily, but I want you to watch for the signal that it's going to be happening all at once. Let me read verses 33 to 36. This is what the sovereign Lord says. On the day I cleanse you from all your sins, on the day, that's when these things are happening. It's going to happen on the day. I will resettle your towns, and the ruins will be rebuilt. The desolate land will be cultivated instead of lying desolate in the sight of all who pass through it. They will say, this land was laid waste, that was laid waste has become like the Garden of Eden. Like the Garden of Eden. That's better than having fertile land to plow and plant. This is like the Garden of Eden. This is super productive land. The cities that are lying in ruins, desolate and destroyed, are now fortified and inhabited. And verse 36 says, then the nations around you that remained will know that I, the Lord, have rebuilt what was destroyed and have replanted what was desolate. I, the Lord, have spoken, and I will do it. Okay, all that day, all that stuff is going to happen relatively quickly. I said suddenly. I didn't say suddenly. I said it's going to happen all at once. It's going to happen very quickly. He says on that day. So what's going to happen is they're going to have Eden-like conditions. Their towns are going to be resettled from ruin and rebuilt. Their no longer their desolate land will be reconditioned and ready to go again to be worked and to be fertile and productive. And all of this on the day on that day, it says, the nations will know I, the Lord, did it. It is still in the future, but God says, I will do it. Here he says, on the day I cleanse you from all your sins. Their greatest sin, as it turns out, they don't know it yet, but their greatest sin is going to be the rejection of their Messiah. And they're going to see him when he returns and realize that they crucified their Messiah. Now that's way in the future for them. That's not until the days of Jesus. Now, when they actually see him come again has not happened yet. That's in our future, and it's still out there in front of us. Let me read Zechariah 12, verse 10. We read this is one of my favorite verses. Since I've studied Zechariah, this has become one of my favorite verses. Zechariah 12, verse 10 says this, and I will pour it, speaking of their forgiveness of their sin and these things happening on that day, and I will pour out on the house of David, which is Israel, and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, a spirit of grace and supplication. They're going to get something they don't deserve in a good way. It's going to be something they're going to get God's grace. They will look on me, the one they have pierced, and they will mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and grieve bitterly for him as one grieves for a firstborn son. When Jesus returns again, he's going to put his feet on the mountain of Olives. There's going to be this giant earthquake, and the people of Jerusalem are going to see him, and they're going to see his wounds, and they're going to realize that they crucified their Messiah. That is their biggest sin. It's rejection of the one God sent, the rejection of God, their Messiah. They're going to realize it was their Messiah that he was crucified, and they're going to mourn as one mourns for the loss of an only child, an only son. Okay. So verse 37 and 38, we'll go through that, then we'll be done. We'll be through. Why do I say we'll be done? We'll be through. We will have done it. All right, verse 37 to 38, let me read that. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Once again, I will yield to Israel's plea and do this for them. I will make their people as numerous as sheep, as numerous as the flocks for offerings at Jerusalem during their appointed festivals. So will the ruined cities be filled with flocks of people. They will know that I am the Lord. Notice, for the house of Israel, I will do this for them. I will do this for them. Notice there's a colon there. He's not talking about what's come before. He's talking about what's coming after. There's a colon. I will do this for them. Look at that again, verse 37. This is what the sovereign Lord says. Once again, I will yield to Israel's plea and do this for them, colon, which means after the colon is what he says he's going to do for them. He says, I'm going to make them numerous again. They are not that numerous in captivity. And why? Because the men died. Many of the men died in the wars. Their birth weights were low. They went through famines. He says, you're not going to go through that again. It's not going to be like captivity. It's going to be eaten like you're going to have all kinds of productivity and food and water and nutrients and things to live by, rebuilt cities and all of that. And God says, on this point of numerous, they weren't that numerous in captivity. He says, and I'm going to make you numerous again. He said, all of that is going to change. All right, that's all I have for you today. Thank you for studying with me. Now, what I want to point out is next week, we're going to start our study of chapter 37. It's actually in two main sections, and I don't know if we'll be able to do both sections in one day or not. But the first section is the valley of dry bones. That's kind of one of the reasons people study Ezekiel, is because of these prophecies that are coming from chapter 37 going to the end of the book. But 37 is the valley of dry bones, and that's where we're going to start next week. Okay, thank you for studying with me.